Hello and welcome to this AIDN presentation. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the country of the people that I'm meeting on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd invite anyone who wishes to acknowledge the country which they're tuning in from in the chat function. My name's Demant. I'm on the advisory committee of the Australian International Development Network. And on behalf of the entire team, I'd like to welcome you all. AIDN's purpose is to encourage more and better international giving and investing. We do this by raising awareness, forging alignment, and showcasing opportunities for action. We're really privileged to have two women with us today who are both passionately committed to supporting the women and children of Afghanistan. Najeeba Wazefedost is a Hazara woman born in Afghanistan who came to Australia by boat when she was 10 years old. For her entire adult life, she's been a passionate advocate and living example of the power of refugee leadership, and is the co-founder of the Global Refugee Network and the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees. Samantha Mort was born in Botswana to Scottish parents. She's had an exceptional career. Most recently, she was appointed Chief of Communication, Advocacy and Civic Engagement for UNICEF Afghanistan. That was in late 2020. She was also one of the last Western women who decided to remain in Afghanistan when the Taliban took control. Last Westerners, let alone Western women, who decided to remain in Afghanistan when the Taliban took control of Kabul in August 2021. So before we launch into today's fascinating discussion, I'll ask the audience, if you have any questions, please register them in the chat. Also, this will be recorded and shared with others who are unable to join us today. So welcome, Najeeba and Sam. Hello. Just a quick question to you both. Najeeba, where are you calling in from today?
Hi, Anna. I'm calling from Sydney. So I'm back to Sydney here in Australia.
And Samantha, where are you based today?
I'm in Kabul, Afghanistan.
So Najeeba, 1 year ago, you weren't getting very much sleep. You were watching with horror as the Taliban took control of the country you were born in. And certainly none of us can forget those images of people trying to escape the airport in Kabul. You were in contact with many people trying to leave the country at the time. What did you do to support people at that stage?
Thank you so much, Anna, for the question. I think if I reflect from now to back in August 2021, I feel like not much has changed. Actually, not much has changed for decades. Afghanistan has been in a very despair, ravaged by cycles of conflicts and violence. And it has been quite horrifying to see the number of human sufferings increasing and the number of displacement are on rise every day within the country. So again, I have to say this is in addition to droughts, food insecurity, COVID that's ravaging into the country as well. Many Afghans who couldn't be evacuated by the international governments back in August 2021 are all under threats, which has forced hundreds and thousands of people in rural areas to flee into the city centers in search of support. And this is happening today, this happened in August, and this is happening even more. Some have managed to escape Afghanistan and escape, escape, but have left immediate family members. The majority still continue to cross the borders to Iran and Pakistan, and very little actually gets resettled into countries like ours in Australia, as well as United States and Canada. And because of the unstable political situation and the economic supply chain are cut off, and many Afghans are being left to fend themselves. Many are currently now without having food and water and shelter. And I'm sure you're going to hear more from Samantha, who's in Kabul right now. And when we talk to people on the ground, when we try to support them, we talk about, how do we meet their basic needs? And that's access to food, that's access to clothing, that's access to fuel, which are the top three concerns when it comes to Afghans. While the top priority needs, at least for women and girls, are actually to be healthcare, rent, and fuel. So again, these are in addition to the causes of, the food prices going up, the harsh winter right now, the frequent, flooding. Just a month ago, we had a flooding happening in Paktia. We had an earthquake happening. So I would say there's not much has changed since August. In fact, it has gone worse. And as a response to all of these challenges, for us as a refugee-led network, Asia Pacific Network of Refugees, commonly known as APNOR, we are trying to provide emergency relief products to meet those immediate needs. We've already supported more than 3,000 families in places where many INGOs cannot travel, in mountains where families are hiding, in harsh areas where Taliban are actually quite visible, to a lot of women who are actually living in hiding. So we've tried to establish a platform also for a regular communication with local-led actors in Afghanistan so that they could also inform the kind of work that we do as APNOR in the country. We have more than 30 volunteers and on very limited paid staff, like 3 to 5 part-time, who are really doing the packaging and delivering of these food products to really in need and displaced and families, especially women and girls. And at the same time, we're trying to provide a bit of mental health support, considering people have lost hope, people have lost their confidence. And for us, it's really about restoring hope and confidence in the lives of people so they can see a better future in the country.
Thank you, Najeeba. Samantha, it's over a year since the Taliban seized power, and UNICEF pledged to stay and deliver. As we've heard from Najeeba, life in Afghanistan is extremely strained by decades of insecurity and natural disaster, and now isolated by the global community to boot. You've told us previously, that 97% of the population in Afghanistan is on the brink of poverty, and that it's driving families to make really desperate choices, from pulling their children out of school to exchanging daughters for dowry years before they might otherwise do so. So can you give us some insight into what it is like to be a child in Afghanistan today?
Of course. Najeeba painted a very vivid and accurate picture of the challenges that the population are facing here in Afghanistan. But of course, it's children who are always the most vulnerable. They're always hit the hardest and hit first. And that has prompted the UN Secretary General to call Afghanistan one of the toughest places on earth to be a child. And I think it's important in the context. I know the umbrella of this discussion is Afghanistan 1 year on, but as Najeeba quite rightly points out, it's a country that is reeling from decades of insecurity, war, and natural disaster, the floods and the earthquake being the most recent example of that. We are currently in the worst drought for 37 years, which is having a huge impact on nationwide malnutrition. 1 in 2 children under the age of 5 is malnourished, and over 1 million children under the age of 5 are at risk of severe acute malnutrition, which means that if we don't get them urgent treatment, those children will die. The harvests have failed again. Just last Thursday, I was talking to mothers who were learning how to mix different food groups to give their children nutritious food, and they were saying we can't afford eggs and we can't afford meat. The harvest has failed. They were talking about apricots that had wizened on branches. They couldn't use them to cook. They couldn't sell them. They've essentially lost the crop, and that is something that's happening across the country. And the timing of that is disastrous, of course, because we're coming up for winter, and this is food on which families and communities were relying. As a result of the drought, water systems are compromised. 8 out of 10 people across Afghanistan are drinking water that is contaminated with bacteria. And that, of course, is fueling the malnutrition crisis. And that's why we're seeing constant increases in children being admitted to hospital with severe acute malnutrition. Last year, UNICEF was admitting around 32,000 children in August last year into hospital for severe acute malnutrition. This August, just a few weeks ago, we admitted 68,000, more than double. And that shows no sign of abating. We're also seeing malnutrition rates rise in mothers, and that's having an impact on, particularly if it's pregnant mothers, they're giving birth too early, or they're giving birth to low birth weight children, which puts them at a disadvantage from the moment they are born. On top of all of that, Afghanistan, after decades of conflict, is one of the most weapons contaminated countries in the world. And, you know, I will, in the course of the conversation, talk about the pros and cons of the new access that we have across the country. But one of the cons is that as more of the country has opened up after the conflict has ended, children are going out and they're playing in areas that they couldn't play before. And sadly, they are bringing home unexploded ordnance, which then detonates in their homes. So we're seeing a lot of injuries and deaths because of this contamination of ordnance. Poverty, as you said, you know, the 97% of poverty that is blighting the country is forcing parents to make desperate choices. They're pulling children out of school, and we know that as soon as children come out of school, they're much more vulnerable, especially girls, to exploitation and abuse, such as early marriage. And so UNICEF is deeply concerned about that. And we're working with communities, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do that in the course of the conversation. But overall, to answer your question, it's a tough place to be a child. We're hearing from parents about how they send their children to bed crying with hunger, how mothers wake up at 5 in the morning to try and find some form of breakfast, begging food from their neighbours, and coming back empty-handed, and their children asking, is there anything for breakfast? And the mothers having to send their children off to school crying. So days are ending in tears, they're starting in tears. We're also seeing in recent days stories now of children doing hard labor, children in brick-making factories, as young as 3 and 4, simply because they have to help their families make ends meet. And so UNICEF's work is you know, more important than ever. There's more demand than ever, and we're grateful for this opportunity to amplify the work and to increase support.
Those numbers are absolutely staggering, Sam. And ironically, I have to apologize for the rain on the roof of the building that I'm in light of what you were saying about drought. Yeah, some of those images that you just conjured up, the wizened apricots, the mothers crying, the children crying before they not being able to go to school with food. It's just almost completely overwhelming. Najeeba, Wazefedost, I know that you're in regular contact with women and communities in Afghanistan, and people are telling you that actually your contact with them and the contact with people outside is extremely important as they struggle with these really practical, life-threatening issues. They are also wanting to hold on to hope. And you've been involved with some really practical works, building on what Sam was talking about. So really practical support that we'll talk about later as well. But could you just touch on a project that you've been involved in recently with women, trying to help them get their voice out to the world?
Sure. Thank you. Again, I have to say that the situation of women and girls really remain extremely challenging in Afghanistan, as they continuously under severe restriction of movement, and that includes participation in public life, that includes access to their basic rights. There is just a growing list of restrictions made every hour I'm not talking every day, every hour by the Taliban. One day it's about banning the school. The next day is banning the hijab. The third day is coming out of your home. The fifth one is you're not allowed to walk without a male. I think that gender segregation that happened in 1980s is back in the country, and in fact, it's worse. And to every woman and girls that we've spoken in Afghanistan so far, each and every one of them are actually telling us how they're a prisoner of their own gender. They no longer see themselves as being free and having a voice. They actually see themselves voiceless, and hence they're looking into people like Samantha, into people like these forums to amplify their voices. Despite the multiple assurance that was given by the Taliban that girls can go to school, an official announcement was made back in 23rd of March to postpone, all the schooling of girls reopening from the above grade 6. So basically, no one from above grade 6 can go to school, no girls. And until now, all of those that were able to receive some sort of education before this are now abandoned at home. They're all isolated. They're basically doing nothing in their daily work other than sitting at home and being depressed. We've actually witnessed a huge number of suicidal attempts in many women and girls as we see this growing list of restrictions. And I think all of these restrictions will potentially lead to long-term negative effects on women's decision-making power, and that includes accessing to opportunities and their social and economic life. So at least for us in APNOR, we've been trying to amplify on their voices. We wanted to make sure that their voices are not only heard by us in APNOR, but it's also heard by others. So one of the many ways on which we've encouraged women in Afghanistan is to actually heal through a poetry activity. And many women and girls in Afghanistan have felt imprisoned. They feel they're trapped due to their gender. And while, as I said, the list of restrictions for women grew by the Taliban, in APNOR, we use poetry as a way to restore hope, as a way to amplify their voices. And with the support of Orange and Sardin Foundation and Red Room Poetry, we were, and of course your support, Anna Demant, and also David Latham from the media outlet, we were able to launch the voices, we were able to launch a poetry named Voices in the Cage, which is basically a collection of poems by 25 brilliant women who are still stuck in the country, reflecting on a variety of personal experiences and depicting basically what it is like to be living as a woman in a country like Afghanistan under the Taliban-led government. And in addition to this, obviously, it was so important for us to look at ways of improving their mental health. It's so important. With every food package that we've delivered so far to women in different areas in the country, in Afghanistan, we've come across such a mental health deterioration where the immediate need is one thing, but being able to bring that stability in their mental health was another huge important factor. And therefore, we were able to really get the support of locals. And I'm going to talk about this very soon. We've had few women who were psychologists in the country that were evacuated to Iran, and they're now in APNOR's shelter in Mashhad in Iran, and they were psychologists. So what happened? We needed psychologists, women who speak Dari, to support these women in Afghanistan to restore that hope. And we had two of these women who just evacuated by land into the country in Iran, and they still don't have a future in a country where in Iran where they're still seeking asylum. They put their hands up. They stood up and said, we want to provide online, counseling support to our women back in the country who are left behind. And now they're providing online telephone mental health support to those that are still in the house and trying to talk to them and restore and bring some sort of hope for live and for a better and secure future. These are just two activities that we are doing to respond to those needs.
Thanks, Najeeba. So we have a question from Bronwyn Manley in the chat, and she was asking, I think it's a question around the actual mechanics of how your organizations are reaching women and children in the light of in the context of the Taliban restricting basic rights. So her question is, what do you have to do to engage, mobilize, and reach them? So Najeeba, you touched on the idea of using technology, so where possible, so online counselling. I'll come back to you, but Sam, could you answer Bronwyn's question?
Of course, thank you. So one of the things that we do, given the increasing restrictions, is that we go to the women. A practical example of that is our mobile health and nutrition teams. UNICEF has around 170 of these teams, but overall across the country, there are about 350 with different organizations. And these teams comprise of doctors, nurses, nutrition counselors, midwives, psychologists, and vaccinators. And we go into the most rural and remote communities so that the women don't need to travel anywhere. We take healthcare to their doorsteps. And you know, I was in a village in June where we went into one of these areas that had never had healthcare, because one of the consequences of the end of the conflict and the de facto authorities taking over is that around 60% of the country has opened up for us. And so we are now able to travel to areas that we haven't been to for decades. And what we were hearing from the women, particularly women who were pregnant, was such relief and such gratitude that there was healthcare coming to their doorsteps. And they were saying to each other, you know, we have the freedom, we can come here, you're here all day long in this house at the bottom of the road, and I don't need permission to come here. I can go with my sisters, my mother, my female neighbors. It's in a safe environment. And so, you know, there was a confidence building that came as part of that. There was relief that they were getting medical care. And, you know, a lot of the stories we were hearing was, you know, I've given birth in my house, you know, with my first 4 children, but now I understand that it's safer if I go to a health facility, if I have a health worker with me. So that's what we're doing, whether it's health and nutrition, or whether it's organizing women's groups. We go into the community to alleviate the pressure and the stress of women traveling anywhere.
Just keep coming on and off mute there. Thanks, Sam. That was really useful. Najeeba, did you have anything to add to that? I know your focus has been also on refugees, so people living in countries bordering Afghanistan as well. You might like to speak to that as well.
Sure. I mean, inside the country in Afghanistan, we do very similarly to Sam. I mean, we do outreach as well to our women, considering that they're no longer able to really move outside. And I think and we've also considered the risks involved if they do come out and get the bulky of products, like we provide food packages, food bulks, to women who might not be able to carry them, or who will become visible to the Taliban. So to reduce the risk, we also travel to them and to women families who are identified through the local actors. So we actually work with some local mosques, we work with local actors, we work with you know, homeless shelters in Afghanistan, who actually help us support and identifying even, you know, more women and girls who we might not be able to reach. And I'm going to give you an example. We just had a flooding in Balkhab about a month ago, which is a city in Afghanistan, another province in Afghanistan, and there was a major flooding. When we actually contacted that city, you know, more than 120 families has actually escaped to the mountains, and we have contacted many INGOs, and we wanted to take support there, but because you had to use donkeys to get to the mountains, not many INGOs could do that. So it was actually APNOR staff where we used more than 20 donkeys to actually deliver the products to women in the mountains. That's the kind of untraditional way of working that we take into. We try to become very innovative in the way that we deliver support to our people, considering, you know, the challenges that exist when it comes to those support. Like many of those women that we reach in the mountain couldn't be accessible to many other INGOs that were working on the ground. And if I give you one other example quickly, in Iran, many of those women and children that are arriving at the borders, they are coming undocumented. Many of them are not able to go to the Iranian government because they still do repatriation. They still send people back home in the country. That's unfortunate. Even though we are talking about the insecurity for women in Afghanistan, but unfortunately, people are getting returned back to home. So what we try to do is to offer women and girls immediately with some temporary shelter support so that they can stay there and they can start arranging for some sort of temporary future if it is to stay in that country or to move elsewhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Najeeba. So Sam, this is something we didn't touch on earlier, but your decision to stay in Afghanistan when so many were deciding to leave, it's an unusual decision, and one that, you know, clearly you're offering so much benefit by being in the country. Can you talk to that decision, but also to the topic that we've just touched on, which is the importance of those grassroots networks and local connections to make the work happen?
Sure. I mean, I stayed in the country because this is what UNICEF does. The E in our acronym is emergency. It's what we were set up to do. It's our mission and mandate. It didn't cross my mind for a moment to leave, but that's not to say, of course, that I wasn't scared. The moment the airport closed, the last flight took off, I had to do some deep breathing for sure. But my mum always brought me up and said, you know, even if you're scared, pretend you're not scared. So I just pretended I wasn't scared and got on with the job because there was so much to do. And I have to say that UNICEF's presence meant so much to the people of Afghanistan during those days. Within 48 hours of the Taliban taking over, they reached out to us and they asked UNICEF to stay. And I think that speaks to the fact that we've been in the country for 70 years, that we've built up trust within all communities, including the Taliban, and that we've remained neutral and impartial. We never take a political stance. We're here only to support the children, the women, and the families. And the Taliban told us to lie low for a week until they could inform their rank and file about who we were and what we were doing. And then we went out and about and we continued our work with the Taliban as our security, which was a bit of a mindset change. I can tell you, it was a bit of a mindset change for my mum as well. But we are here and we are working. As I said before, we have more access than ever before, which gives UNICEF, I think, a unique advantage. We've been here for 70 years. People know who we are. When we went out and about in those first few weeks, we'd come into communities. Before we'd even done anything, people would come up to us and say, UNICEF is here. You didn't leave. You know, as long as UNICEF is here, it's going to be okay. That is the confidence and the trust that the communities have in us. To your question on the grassroots, super important. UNICEF could not work in any country, including Afghanistan, if we did not have that relationship with the grassroots. We don't work unilaterally. We cannot work unilaterally. We must work with the leadership authority in the country, and we must work with the communities. We are a guest in the countries in which we work. So the Taliban, the de facto authorities, understand what we are doing. They support our work and they enable us to do our work. Every single time I leave the compound here, I do so with a Taliban escort who keep us safe and who enable us to go into the most rural and remote communities. And I can assure you that they don't get in the way. They're not interfering with our work. The recent earthquake was a good example. You know, I did 30 interviews on the day of the earthquake, on the 23rd of June, and almost every question was, is the Taliban preventing you from reaching the communities? And I said, no. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the Taliban reached out to us asking for our support to do a needs assessment of the communities that were affected. And we went down and we worked with the de facto authorities to see what had to be done. And then we started getting aid into the most mountainous regions. So we are working together. It's not always easy. The restrictions are having an impact. The de facto authorities are increasingly interested in what we're doing and want to know more. But we are able, we're able, as I say, to work further afield than ever before. And then with the grassroots, we are seeing huge demand for our support and huge willingness to be part of the solution. You know, Najeeba has painted a picture of the chronic poverty that is affecting the country. But we also see incredible generosity and incredible kindness. So, you know, we go into hospitals where patients have to pay for medicine, and a lot of them just cannot pay for medicine. And we hear stories about the nurses and the doctors paying their patients' medicine out of their own salaries. We hear stories about, you know, UNICEF in some communities has a 3-year education program where we set up classes in remote villages. And when that comes to an end, we see communities coming to us and saying, okay, give us the tent, keep the textbooks, we'll pay for the wood to keep the classrooms warm in the winter. How can you help us? If we do this, can you do that? So that there's a real coming together, working with UNICEF to keep the programs sustainable. So long story short, we're working with the grassroots, we're working with the de facto authorities to keep vital life-saving programs going.
It's crucial work. Najeeba, do you have a response to Sam's?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Samantha when it comes to involving the local actors. So I would say they're definitely the knowledge holders when it comes to forced displacement. They have value, expertise, and could be essential partners when we talk about forced displacement. So they should definitely be included. At least for us, you know, in APNOR, we've been consulting many Afghans, including Afghan local partners, in finding out what they see as priority and what they see as needs. Even though in APNOR, we've actually got our own group, internal reference group that work on that are Afghans and have their own perspective and views in terms of what the needs could be inside the country. But we are ensuring that, you know, everything that APNOR does on the ground, getting from the emergency relief product to mental health support to women advocacy outreach, and we try that all of these activities are actually guided and supported by the voices of the local. So what we've done is that we've held regular consultations with local actors across the country. So, and through these regular consultations, we've actually built together and established the first Afghan strategic advisory group that works very closely with APNOR in guiding and supporting the kind of work that we do on the ground. One thing that we hear, I'm sure Samantha also hears from our local Afghan-led organizations on the ground, is that they're chronically under-resourced, as always, and they receive very little support when it comes, or recognition when it comes to other stakeholders. And this is very important work, you know, to be able to support, you know, their work. We need to listen to them, because I believe the solution lies within the affected communities. And if we look at the pandemic as an example, you know, it was a crisis for many of us. But if you look around the world, it was turned into an opportunity by the local-led organizations, by refugee-led organizations. And it's very the same in Afghanistan. Many had to evacuate back in August last year. All the embassies had to close down. All the international organizations had to leave because they had no other options. But it was really, you know, the local-led organizations who became the frontline responders in dealing and handling the situation on their own. And hence, that's why it's so important to ensure that everything we do in Afghanistan is actually directed and instructed by them and through their voices, that their voices are sitting within the core of our decision-making processes, whether it's UNICEF, whether it's UNHCR, whether it's government. We need to ensure local-led initiatives are supported and are able to contribute when it comes to design, implementation, and evaluation of any kind of projects. And one other quick comment that I want to make to Samantha's point in relation to the Taliban. This is actually a very controversial topic that I can speak to for hours, maybe. When we wanted to, I mean, for us, when we wanted to work on the ground, and we've been traveling all around the country to provide support to newly displaced families, every time we were thinking of, going into some negotiation plan or conversation with the Taliban, we were immediately held off because we realized that the communities were not trusting us if we did that. Every time, if we had a Taliban army, let's say, next to us, or if we had a Taliban army actually accompanying us to any of the houses, or basically showing that there is a support from them, I think that the kind of trust that we've built with the community on the ground would have been basically diminished. We wouldn't have the same trust as we have right now. People living in fear, to be honest. So it's not about a new Taliban with a new face that came since August. It's the same people. They're still killing. They're still killing women. They're still killing children. They're still persecuting the minority. I'm from the Hazara ethnic minority, and for decades we've been killed because of our religion. Just the major attacks happened in the past few months in few provinces, which was again another testimony of the violence that this Taliban can carry, and they're not going to stop. And until these images are with people, they're never going to trust Taliban. And I think if for us we worked and partnered with any Taliban forces, and we were actually in fact could have been approached or could have done some sort of negotiation with the Taliban, but that would have been a no answer from our organization, APNO, to the Taliban, considering that people are in fear. They're not ready yet. They're not ready yet to see. I don't think it's not about them being ready. It's just the trust is not there. The Talibans have killed and still killing and persecuting, and that hasn't stopped. We've seen it and we're seeing it. And I personally think that there is no way for us to call the Taliban a stable government to rule or to do anything in the country, neither for women, neither for anyone. So I wouldn't agree, at least to all the voices that we are hearing from all of those that have been evacuated, to those that we're supporting in Iran, to those that we're supporting in the country, to all the voices that we've heard. Each and every one of those voices are talking of fear, talking of persecution, talking of death, talking of forced marriage, as Samantha mentioned, talking of rape, talking of torture and trauma, talking of being abandoned, being isolated, being imprisoned. We're talking to thousands of girls. They used to hold a pen and book in their hands. They used to see a future. Now they have no future. We're receiving images from women and girls who are actually drawing really black, dark pictures and telling us this is what their life has become into. So, and imagine if I had a Taliban army working next to me with a truck of bulk food items, and saying that they're partnering with us, I think the people would not reach us. And I think that's why the role of APNO becomes quite crucial in the country, because as I said, we really go and reach people where many haven't been able to reach to because of the security purposes, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Najeeba. Sam, can you talk to that tension? So you're delivering emergency aid, you're delivering vaccinations, you're getting in there and providing emergency support, but you also have an advocacy agenda, which is education for all, particularly girls, which Najeeba spoke to so eloquently, the fact that these girls who once were holding a pen are now trapped in their homes. So can you talk to the tensions of having to navigate a Taliban-dominated landscape? This is a question from one of the audience members. Navigate a Taliban-dominated landscape while implementing programs with a focus on women and girls?
Right. It is not easy, as Najeeba said. It is not easy, and it is getting harder. But we will never give up, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with every single girl and every woman in Afghanistan. And I think we have made that very clear through the power of our presence and the fact that we are nationwide across, we have 13 offices, and we are in regular contact with these communities. We are deeply disappointed and deeply concerned about the rollback of rights and restrictions that we're seeing for girls and women, and we are advocating every day. It dominates our working day. Our representative, our senior management are advocating with the de facto authorities every day. But while we continue to do that, so too do we continue to provide solutions. And I think, as I said before, because we have this trust in the community, because we have long been impartial and neutral, we are able to operate. So when it comes to the education landscape, for example, we are currently printing and distributing 38 million textbooks so that children can continue to learn. We are training 1,200 female teachers right now because we know that one of the main barriers to girls going to school is a lack of female teachers. That has been cited by the de facto authorities. And they are enabling us to train those teachers. If they didn't want us to do that, they could shut us down. They're enabling us to do that. And most significantly, UNICEF has a program called community-based education. These are not public schools. They are small classes that can take place in mosques or tents or somebody's front room. And they follow the Ministry of Education curriculum. They are taught by Ministry of Education trained teachers. And UNICEF pays the teacher's salary. We provide the teaching and learning materials, the whiteboard, the pens. We give every child a school bag with jotters and pens and pencils. And these classes can happen in some of the most rural and remote areas across Afghanistan. We've currently got around 12,000 of these classes up and running. And by the end of the year, we will have 20,000. And again, the de facto authorities are enabling us to expand this program. And it's a real confidence builder. And the reason that we're expanding this is because of the huge demand that we see from communities. Because, Najeeba spoke very eloquently to the loss of hope, which is, I think, felt more keenly now 20 years on, because girls and women have had 2 decades of their rights. They've been working in high-profile positions. They've been educated. They've been able to travel. And so now that that's taken away, there is an even greater sense of angst, as we can all understand. But what that is manifesting itself as is huge demand. People coming to UNICEF, fathers, community elders, religious leaders, even members of the de facto authorities themselves, asking us to create schools and to support their own education efforts. We get groups from rural communities saying, well, we found a space where there can be a class and we've got a teacher who will work for free. We just need some textbooks. So we're responding all the time to those kind of requests. The same happens with water. Communities who are suffering through the drought are approaching us because they know our track record of delivering sustainable solutions. And they're asking us to build solar-powered water plants in the communities so that they don't need to leave their support system. So we're doing all of this, but of course we cannot do it alone. We need the constant support of our donors and our partner governments. And I do want to take the opportunity to say that, we are here in the country busier than ever delivering these programs, thanks to the generosity of our donors and partners. And, in words of one syllable, because it's a question I get so often, I want to say that every penny that we get in UNICEF comes to UNICEF and is distributed through our partners. It goes directly to the beneficiaries. No money for UNICEF goes via the de facto authorities. And I think that's an anxiety that a lot of people have. We simply could not work like that.
Thanks, Sam. Najeeba, did you want to respond? And then after that, we've got 3 questions actually from the audience. And one is, I'm going to list each of those questions and then ask for you both to respond. One is actually to Sam's point around education and Najeeba's as well. There's this spiral, obviously, that happens once you have the poverty, you've got uneducated children, and then you've got the unstable future, which kind of perpetuates this cycle of conflict. So big picture question, how do you think this chain of problems can be broken? That's one question. The second question was quite technical, and perhaps part of the answer to the first question, which is what's the continuing role of the internet and how important is connectivity? Najeeba, you talked about the online counselling that you're offering, the fact that you can call in and that you have access to your community is thanks to technology. I think you've got some WhatsApp groups that are pretty live, and some ways that you access communities thanks to that. And then actually a question to you, Sam, as to whether where does the internet, how does the internet assist you with your programs of emergency aid, food and health? That was the general question there. And then wrapping it all up, we will go back to this issue of fundraising efforts and the hesitancy that might be the donor hesitancy around supporting NGOs who might be working in Afghanistan, let alone with the Taliban. I know that's something that you've faced, Najeeba, actually trying to find ways to get cash into the country. And I'd love you both to touch on that issue of cash transfers as well, because that's you both are big advocates for getting money into the hands of the most vulnerable. So there's a mixed salad there for you both to grapple with, but I am aware that we've got 14 more minutes and so much more to talk about. So if I could give you both a little bit of time to address some of those questions and perhaps interact with one another at this stage. So Najeeba, I'll go to you first. And if you could both keep it to a few minutes each and to and fro, because I think the interaction between you both is part of what we're here to, we're grateful to receive.
Sure, and I might have forgotten some of the questions, but I'll try to remember most and answer it in the best way possible. I think when it comes to connectivity, I think you said it all, Anna, it's just so important, especially in the cases of women and girls. Now we're trying to really explore some ways of online education for those that are not able to go and access education in the country. And without internet, we're not able to do that. Many of the universities, or at least secondary schools that we've spoken around the world, who are willing to support women and girls in the country would require that internet. And I think one of the other reasons connectivity becomes so important is because people want to, families want to be connected to families who are actually out of the country, whether it's their children who are in Iran or Pakistan, or whether it's those immediate family members that have gone around some part of the world that they have no basically answer as to where they are. So they want to find out where they are. I think connectivity has become so important in this special area because we've had so many children being lost. At least during the crisis, we received more than 200 cases of unaccompanied children that were lost during the evacuation process. And they wanted ACNUR to find out where their children are, whether they're in Australia, whether they're in Canada, did they ever make it to anywhere? Because they were trying to send their children through the airport, you know, and they couldn't get to that information to Red Cross or elsewhere without the internet access. So I think connectivity is so important when we talk about responding to forced displacement situation. It helps and ease the whole situation. And I'm sure Samantha can talk more to this, how it's more effective when it comes to aid delivery as well. When it comes to that question of, you know, the child education and uneducated and families and how much role they have in child education, I feel like the culture in Afghanistan is something that we need to change for very long decades. And again, when we talk about, I think education for men and boys, it's very different to the education when we talk about girls and children, female children, because again, I think the way families view, I think economic stability is very different. They feel like if they invest in their son and men, there's a way for them to bring money back to the family. So they're the bread makers of the family. But if they invest education in girls and females, it's nothing other than them getting married and go away. So they don't. So for me, I think the culture has been a main problem for very long decades before even the Taliban existed. But obviously now things are even more different because it's the Taliban also adding to that. And again, I'll allow Samantha to talk more to that. I have so much to talk about the cash transfer. I don't know whether I should wait and get Samantha to comment something on that, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, I'll come in very quickly on the internet, and I see that Bronwyn has just asked a question about equal access, which is exactly what I wanted to, where I wanted to start, Bronwyn. they don't have equal access. Internet connectivity is not good across the country, and for that reason it's not one of the main ways in which UNICEF is delivering programs or relying on. When it comes to education, internet is still a luxury in this country. In a country where 97% of the population is on the brink of poverty, where people cannot put food on the table, internet connectivity is a luxury. So when it comes to education, what we are exploring, in addition to the community-based education program that I spoke about earlier, is lessons that we can deliver on tablets that don't rely on the internet, and lessons that can be delivered through the radio. But one of the barriers to that is that the telephones, if a family has a telephone, if a family has a radio, if a family has a television, again, luxury, luxury, luxury. It's usually the man, it's usually the husband, the father-in-law, the older brother that holds that device, and women and girls typically don't get it. So that's why we're not, I mean, we're exploring options, but it's a long way off, I would say. I think because of time, I will stop there so that we can get onto the cash-based assistance questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Samantha you have so much to talk about this. I mean, at least for us in APNOR, as soon as the crisis started, we all know that the banks start shutting down. So there was no more of money exchange or money transfer through the banks in Afghanistan. And I'm sure Samantha can agree with this. We had, lines inside in the streets in Kabul where people would line up from the night before just to stay behind the ATM for hours, like 24 hours literally, just to be able to get, let's say, $10 Australian $10 equal to Afghans out of the ATM, and not more than that. So it was a huge challenge because we wanted to basically get money into the hands of the people in the country, because we needed to buy products, we needed to buy a lot of equipment. So for us, we had to find that a way. And I think this is, again, another reason why the role of local actors became so important. We started transferring money into the country through the Hawala system. So it's called Hawala, H-A-W-A-L-A, Hawala system. It's very similar to Greater Western Union Agency, but it's a business-led agency run by the hands of the locals in different countries outside Afghanistan and also in the country. So for instance, if we had to send $30,000 to buy products in the country, we didn't literally had to go and send it. We would have gone to a Hawala agency here in Australia who has, the business and the money in the country. So we would give them 30,000 here, and then they would hand over the $30,000 to our local actors on the ground in Afghanistan, in Kabul, for instance. So the Hawala system is a system which we've used for many, many years. It actually existed before the crisis, especially for many of the Afghans who were undocumented and they didn't have access to bank accounts, so they could use the Hawala system to receive money just by showing a small identity paper. But I think, and this is really how APNOR dealt with cash transfer or money transfer from here. And it was quite interesting to see that while we were trying to do this, many other international NGOs were also approaching APNOR and asking, we actually want to transfer money to Afghanistan. How do we do it? We actually supported so many international NGOs to use the same method as us to deliver money on the ground so that they could use that money to support, the newly displaced people in the country, like organizations like Amnesty International, like the organization of IDC, International Detention Coalition. Even we supported many hospitals, private hospitals here in Australia, where they funded and wanted to donate money to a local actor, but they didn't know how to get it into their hands. And it was
Najeeba, could you speak? We don't have so much time left for us, but I think the question is actually more about the benefit from a development perspective of giving funds directly to people on the ground. So there has been some people who are not part of the sector might have some reticence or be cautious about giving money directly to people, but there's a lot of arguments in favor of that. Could you speak really briefly to the power of giving a woman who's very hungry money? And,
Sure.
and then when you've done that, if you could hand to Sam, because it'd be great to get both your perspectives on this.
Sure. I mean, ideally, you know, if we want to support the situation in Afghanistan, we need to empower people in the country. So one way that we could do this is to really take the opportunities back to the locals. For instance, to recruit the locals when it is about delivery, to be able to provide, you know, that incentive to those that are actually in the country. I'm going to give you one small example. I was involved in another project for another organization where they were running $500,000 to support, you know, the situation of Afghanistan. From $500,000, I'm going to say this very truly, and it might make sense and it might not make sense. Out of $500,000, we were only able to support 2,000 families with food product. And all of the rest of the money went to all the bureaucratic processes, structure processes, like things that could have been much way cheaper and more doable if it was delivered through the hands of the locals, because they know the situation, they have the contacts, they have the trust, they have the connectivity that we need, and it's all built up. So it's all about allocating the resource for them, improving you know, their sustainability and allowing them to take the lead, because again, it's going to be them to handle the situation once every other NGO leaves or APNOR leaves. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sam, over to you, if you could talk about that specific issue.
Yeah, I would say that when you go into communities and you ask what they need, they want money. And they want money because not only is it empowering, as Najeeba says, but because every family situation is different. They're all mired in poverty, but it looks different from family to family. And you know, we were filming in a community in the Northwest recently, and I was asking a woman who was receiving a cash payment why it was important, and wouldn't she prefer bundles of blankets and winter clothes for her children. And she said, you know, why do you think you know what I need? You know, she said, in the past, you've given me shoes when I need food, or you've given me blankets when I need medicine. Money gives me the ability to spend it on what I need. And we are seeing such huge demand for our cash transfers, and there is such success in this program because we monitor very, very carefully the people that we give the money to. We follow them into you know, the markets once they receive the money. We do follow-up visits to their homes after they receive the money, and we hear they're spending the money on medicine, they're spending the money on fuel, they're spending the money on education supplies for their children. There's very, very little attrition. This is the most direct, it's the fastest way to help people in need. And I have to say that it is the program I think I'm most proud of in UNICEF Afghanistan. We have a very secure management information system. We have strong local partners, as Najeeba says, we work through the hawalas as well to get money into the country. We target female-headed households. This is a country where there are more widows than any other country in the world because of the 40 years of fighting and insecurity. We target the families where there are children with disabilities and where there are adolescent girls, where the money is going to be used most effectively. So for me, cash transfers are about dignity, they're about choice, they're about empowerment, and they're about sustainability. And that is why UNICEF Afghanistan is scaling up this program faster and further than any of our other programs.
What a wonderful note to end on. Najeeba, could we have a quick takeaway from you? We do only have 1 minute left.
Sure. I mean, my takeaway, just in addition to what Samantha mentioned, cash transfer is so important, especially in places where people don't have any house and they're living in tents. We wanted to provide bulky items to women and children, but they were in the streets. So they weren't able to look after the products and food items that we were giving them. So it was
the only option was to provide them through the cash transfer. And that's why it becomes so important, especially to those group of people. And I want to thank each and everyone who are supporting the crisis of Afghanistan. We couldn't do it without your support, and we count on this allyship and support. So again, thank you for having me, and thank you, Anna, for your moderation.
Thank you to you both. It's been just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we would love to have talked about. What a pair of remarkable women. We'll certainly be sending an email with links, a wrap-up email with links to resources and a copy of this recording. We encourage you to contact Asia Pacific Network of Refugees and Najeeba and support their work, and also to get behind UNICEF's campaign. It is their largest campaign to date, and the reason is, well, you've heard the reason why. The need is immense, but there's these moments of hope, these moments of dignity that are extremely meaningful, and this is a very powerful way for you to support the people of Afghanistan, because they are more than the crisis that is upon them. On another note, please note that we've got a new episode of our AIDN podcast dropping tomorrow. Please tune in to hear Roy Head. He's the Executive Director of Development Media International and an extraordinary practitioner. It's not to be missed. Thank you again to Sam and Najeeba, and good luck with your work. And please, everyone, do get behind these causes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.